Hello, everybody. I hope you are enjoying your course. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there to do the presentation in person, but hopefully my technological skills won't let me down today and you can watch the whole presentation without any issues. My name is Luis Sanchez. I am a student of the Master of International Public Health. Well, actually, hopefully by the time you watch the presentation, I will have finished my dissertation and I will just be awaiting for graduation. If not, then, well, Joe, I assure it will be done very soon because, by the way, Joe is my supervisor. I'm originally from Colombia, but I've been living in Australia for about 10 years. And 3 years ago, I was attending the course just like you are at the moment. I did my course on health aspect of disasters early in my master because I had a particular interest in emergency and disaster risk management. And that's why Joe invited me today to share with you my experience in doing my dissertation, which is related to this topic. And hopefully this inspire some of you in your studies or even in your professional life, because I really hope that's the case. Well, the title of my dissertation and my presentation is Knowledge, Beliefs, Attitudes and Behaviors Regarding and Disaster Risk Management and Emergency Services in Chia, Colombia. Chia is a city close to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, about 20 kilometers north. But I will tell you more about it later in the presentation. At this stage, I just want to thank the local firefighting service, the local government, and the University of Queensland because the work conducted there was only possible because of their support. So the presentation will be divided in three main parts. The first one, I will tell you a little bit the story behind the project, how it all came together. The second part, I will talk a little bit about the context, about Colombia and about the municipality where the study was done. And the last part, I will talk about specifically about the study. I will tell you some of the details and some of the results of the study. So first, I'll tell you a little bit the story behind the project. In 2012, I started working with a private organization interested in developing the concept of corporate social responsibility in Latin America. They wanted to contribute to emergency and disaster management in the region, but they didn't have much experience in that regard. So long story short, I had to pretty much start from scratch, read about the topic, meet and interview a lot of people with experience and knowledge in this type of activities, just to get a sense of what we could do for whoever we were going to help. Also at that time, as part of the process, I decided, well, I will do the Master in International Public Health because I have a medical background and to gain a wider knowledge of the international cooperation sector. And of course, particularly in health. So my analysis at that time was that it was not appropriate to focus on response, like just building an emergency medical team, like already there are many emergency medical teams around the world, but still there's a lot of focus on response. But at that time I thought, well, we didn't have the resources, and more importantly, I quickly understood that there was a real need in community in contributing to the building local capacity of vulnerable countries and communities instead of just bringing resources from other places. I proposed at that time that we could define a specific community with some strategic advantages, help them improve to develop and implement some sort of local community strategy on disaster risk management, and eventually use this work as the foundation to pursue higher goals. In other words, I proposed to start working at the grassroots level and develop a bottom up strategy because there is growing evidence that the top-down approach of disaster risk management is failing to address some of the specific local needs of vulnerable communities. It ignores potential of local resources and their capacities. And in some cases, it even increases the people's vulnerability. So in essence, what I proposed was to develop the concept of community-based disaster risk management, which has been defined as a process in which at-risk communities are actively engaged in the identification, analysis, treatment, monitoring, and evaluation of disaster risks within their communities in order to reduce their vulnerabilities and enhance their capacities. It basically aims to address the root causes of people vulnerabilities, which are generated by social, economic, and political structures. And also it aims to enhance people capacity so that they can be active in the decision-making process, particularly related to disaster risk management. So we started working with the volunteer firefighters in the municipality of Chia in Colombia. There were a lot of strategic reasons why we did that, but there's not enough time it's not the focus. It's not the main focus of the presentation, so I won't expand on that. But the main expectation was to build the foundation or to build a strong foundation and then expand the project to actually be able to increase its impact. So now the second part of the presentation. I will explain a little bit the context of Colombia and the municipality of Chia, and this will give you some understanding of why we conducted the work over there. Colombia is located in the northern tip of South America. It has a population of about 48 million people. Almost 30% of them living below poverty line, according to the National Statistics Center. It is considered also a middle-income country with a gross domestic product of $292 billion last year, and economic growth close to about 3.1% last year, and an inflation rate of 5%. Due to the geographical and topographic characteristics of the country, it is exposed to various natural hazards. It is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and there is also high seismic activity throughout the Andes, the Andes mountain range. It is influenced by many of the tropical storms in the Caribbean, and we frequently suffer the effects of El Niño and La Niña phenomena. Also, the wide variety of climates it's exposed the population to various biological hazards as well. Apart from the natural hazards, of course, there are many man-made hazards. The main one, the internal conflict that has been going on in Colombia for more than 50 years, and is accentuated by illicit drug trafficking activities, is responsible for many of the social hazards in the country. Apart from that, the economic growth and development of the country comes with a lot of technological threats, mainly because of lack of regulation or lack of enforcement of the regulations. In regards to vulnerabilities of the country, it has a high rate of internal migration related to the internal conflict, and this has produced a lot of unplanned urbanization, which expose the population to building structures not following the codes, not proper sanitation, etc., etc. the high rate of poverty of the country, as I mentioned before, the environmental damage associated to the uncontrolled development and the lack of enforcement of regulations, and inadequate and deficient urban growth and land use planning. And apart from that, there are limited coping capacities. The disaster risk and emergency management in Colombia is largely volunteer based. And many of these people lack or have insufficient training and resources to do their job. And so far, the focus of the emergency management in Colombia has been the response, not much on prevention and other parts of the disaster risk management. According to the International Disaster Database, the NDAT, in the last 10 years, the majority of disaster deaths in Colombia, about 1,200, have been related to floods, followed by landslides, with about 200 people. The number of people affected by floods in the same period is estimated to be around 9.3 million. However, two particular disasters have had a major impact on the country's history, and more specifically on how disaster risk management has evolved in the country. The total destruction of the city of Armero in 1985 by a volcano or eruption killed more than 20,000 people and prompted the creation of the National System for Disaster Management in 1989. Then, in 2010 and 2011, the rainy seasons during this period were longer and stronger due to La Niña phenomenon, and this caused widespread flooding in the country with unprecedented damages and costs. As a result, in 2012, the National System for Disaster Risk Management was restructured by the Law 1523 of 2012. The new system, or the new platform for disaster risk reduction, embraced the disaster risk management as a policy goal, and gave the explicit priority to a much broader range of disaster risk management practices. It introduced a systems approach to risk governance, horizontally integrated across the government, ministries and departments, and vertically across regional, departmental, and local governments. In the 4 years of the new system, there has been significant change, particularly in availability of resources for disaster risk management. Probably there is a need for more relevant training for all the emergency services available across the country. But the impact of the new system will have to be assessed in the near future because it hasn't been done so far. So now the context about the municipality of Chia, which of course is not very different from the country. It is a middle to small city with a population of about 126,000 people, and it's located about 20 kilometers north of Bogota at 2,600 meters above the sea level in the high Andean plateau called Sabana de Bogota. Due to its location, it is exposed to different natural hazards, including significant seismic risk and flooding from two small rivers that cross the city from north to south. The surrounding mountains pose a threat for landslides and bushfires. The municipal growth and development associated to rapid demographic growth and a high population density have come together with an increase in the number and variety of technological and societal hazards, which include traffic accidents and incidents with hazardous materials. Environmental damage, which has been considered to cause or enhance emergencies and disaster, is evident in the municipality. And existing and emerging hazards and vulnerabilities expose the population in the municipality to varying degrees of disaster risk, with a predominance of the small to medium scale events. Similarly to what happened in the country, the 2010 and 2011 rainy seasons, together with La Niña phenomenon, put the municipality in turmoil and unveiled many of the existing problems in the city. It is estimated that 3,350 people had their homes affected, and about 7% of the total area of the city was flooded. The factors associated to these circumstances were the inadequate urban growth planning, deficient land use planning, and inconsistent environmental management, particularly in regards to the use of riverbeds. And just an example of that is that the local urban growth plan, which was under review at the time of the event, which that is around 2010 and 11, almost 3 years later, when I started my intervention, it was still under review. So that's an example of how the regulations sometimes don't uh, do what is expected or don't happen as they should. So now, with this context in mind, now I will talk about the project about the project that I developed as part of my dissertation. But first, it is important to review some general concepts. Uh, Disaster risk, for example, is determined by the characteristics of a hazard, its intensity, its location, and the factors that determine the vulnerability of the affected population to that hazard, to that particular hazard. So in this context, hazard refers to a physical event or phenomenon or human activity that may cause the loss of life or injury or property damage or social and economic disruption or environmental degradation. And on the other side, vulnerability is the interrelation between exposure and susceptibility as stressors of the system and the balancing effects of coping capacities. So in other words, vulnerability is determined by the degree, duration, or extent in which a system is in contact with or subject to a perturbation by a hazard, the capacity of individuals, groups, or the system to withstand the impact of the hazard, which is the susceptibility, and the ability of people, organizations, and systems to manage adverse conditions, risk, or disasters using available skills and resources, which is the coping capacities. Well, based on this definition, you can appreciate that the human actions can influence disaster risk by reducing the vulnerability of the people or of the individuals, communities, and societies. And actions on what evidence has shown and experience has shown is that actions taken in the pre-disaster phase are the most cost-effective and therefore the most relevant to achieve sustainable development. And basically, the work that we can do in the pre-disaster phase has been organized in four main type of activities. One of them is risk identification. The other one is risk reduction and mitigation, risk transfer, and preparedness. So basically what this implies is that a thorough analysis of location, severity, and intensity of hazards and vulnerabilities will guide the measures that can be taken to eliminate or reduce the intensity of the hazardous event. But given that the risk cannot always be avoided, well, further actions will prepare a population to respond to this type of events and will put in place transfer mechanisms to ensure availability of resources to cope with the losses. So basically, that's what all these different phases involve. The general view is that there is a major responsibility of the public sector in disaster risk management. However, there is growing evidence, as I mentioned before, that top-down disaster risk management fail to address specific local needs of the population and vulnerable communities, ignoring the potential of local resources and capacities, and in some cases even increasing the people's vulnerability. So one thing to consider is that people at the community are the ones who suffer the adverse effect, and consequently, it is just reasonable to think or to allocate some significant responsibility to them in the prevention and preparedness of activities for individuals and communities. And that's what is community-based disaster risk management all about, to allocate that responsibility to the community and to individuals. So basically, what are the sort of activities that we can do as part of community-based disaster risk management? Consistently with disaster risk management, we first have to identify hazards and risks to be able to analyze and produce some sort of intervention that actually reduce that risk. But also this information will help us to prioritize the hazards that need attention first, or the communities or the individuals that need more support or that need support first. One way of doing this is a participatory risk and vulnerability assessment, which is a way to establish hazards to which a community is exposed to and to estimate the probability of the event, its magnitude, and potential impact. The analysis is made on the basis of historical evidence, on empirical research, or community perception. The information obtained with these activities can further guide other actions, like, for example, it can inform a community education program aimed at increasing awareness on the main hazards in the community. But what's the problem? The communities are complex and often not united, and they are not even defined by a location in the map. On top of that, communities are dynamic and constantly evolving and changing. So there's a need for adequate community strategies to effectively involve people in disaster risk management issues. So we need a proper disaster risk communication strategy or process as well. So actually both the participatory risk assessment and the disaster risk communication process have to be knowledgeable of the community, of the understanding of the community in terms of how they relate to hazards and to concepts such as risk, prevention, and preparedness in order to be effective, in order to persuade people to adopt self-protective behaviors and practices. But what are the things that we need to know? We need to, for example, understand people's perception of risks and how confident do they feel about emergency issues. We also need to understand people's knowledge and information about hazard and where they get them. We need to know people's information about preparedness and emergency and where they get them. We need to know people's behavior at the family and community level, how they react to warning signals, what sort of preparedness activities they implement, or what sort of activities they do or they carry out during an emergency. More importantly, we need to establish what sort of behaviors related to hazards and risk need to be changed to prevent disasters or to help mitigate other disasters. So that's what my project is about. about establishing knowledge, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors regarding disaster risk management in emergency services in Chia, and trying to answer some of these questions. So based on this, I developed and applied a cross-sectional survey to a random sample obtained from the local database used to identify beneficiaries of social programs in the municipality of Chia. The inclusion criteria for the study were the head of household, to be a head of household, to be older than 18 years old, and to be an inhabitant of Chia. The map is a visual representation of the distribution of the actual sample within the territory. And the questionnaire applied to this sample was organized with 5 sections. There was a section on general information and the characteristics of the sample. The second section refers to the knowledge and perception they have about hazards. The third section refers to the information they have and where they get them in regards to, of course, preparedness and disaster risk management. Another section, the fourth section, refers about people's preparatory actions, what things they have put in place in regards to preparedness and disaster risk management. And finally, a section that involves it asks about some resilient behaviors, try to establish some characteristic resilient behaviors within communities. So I collected 272 surveys. The respondents' average age was 44 years old. There was a slightly higher proportion of women. Approximately 68% of the respondents only had high school education or lower. The majority of respondents, about 89%, were from the socioeconomic stratas level 2 and 3, based on the local scale, which goes from 1 to 6, being 1 the lowest and 6 the highest. Almost 35% of respondents had been directly affected by a hazard, and the most common hazard reported were crime-related events, flooding, vehicle accidents, and fires. And this was in line with the hazards with the highest level of concern within the population. So within people who hasn't been affected by hazard were also concerned about some hazards, and these were the most common: crime, fire, earthquake, drought, vehicle accidents, and flooding. I also asked about the actual use of emergency services in the municipality. 46.3% of respondents reported having used the emergency number, which is consistent with the proportion of people who reported being affected by hazards. However, regardless that the municipality of Chia has the availability of all the emergency services, the emergency number, the ambulance service, the firefighter, which is not the case in most of the cities in the country, they actually believe that the level of preparation of the local government and emergency services is quite low. And this is relevant because it has been shown that trust on institutions is a relevant factor to improving preparedness in a community. Another interesting observation: only 36.4% of the respondents referred having received information about preparedness. The most common source of this information was actually the workplace, followed by schools and firefighters, but not very close. And the preferred means of communication by people was the person to person or through the television. When asked if one can be prepared for an emergency or disaster, the large majority acknowledged that this is possible. However, when asked if their households were prepared, The large majority acknowledged that this was not the case. And this was confirmed by the fact that only 30% referred that they would call the emergency number as the first option in the case of an emergency. And the majority, 56%, have not had a conversation on the topic, which is considered the first step towards preparedness. So basically, what this set of questions show is the dissociation between what people know, what they think, and how they behave. Achieving preparedness need much more than providing the right information. It has been proposed that preparedness is a matter of behavior change, and therefore strategies to develop or to improve preparedness need to consider how people move through this concept, through this behavior change framework. There needs to be action at every stage to try to change the way they think, to improve their knowledge first, to change the way they think, and to finally get the way of achieving the expected behavior. Actually, a common way of measuring preparedness has been through the use of checklists, mostly related to having a family emergency plan and an emergency or disaster supply kit. The difficulty with this approach lies in determining if people own certain emergency items coincidentally, or whether they deliberately have collected these items to prepare for an emergency. The alternative is to try to measure how mindful people are of planning for emergencies and not just measuring the final outcome. That is why in this section the question aims to have an understanding of the cognitive process behind preparedness behavior, which implies a progression through stages of change before reaching the expected behavior. If you see the slide, about half of the population have not even considered doing some of the actions, but there are about 20-25% they said or refer that they are planning to do it, which implies a closer step towards change to achieving the expected behavior, and some of them refer that they actually achieve the behavior, which is around let's say 30-35% in some cases. Similar situation can be seen in the in the implementation of a disaster kit in the household. About, let's say, close to 40% have not considered doing it. However, as mentioned before, here it is very difficult to determine if people own certain emergency items coincidentally, or whether they deliberately have collected these items to prepare for an emergency or disaster. For example, it was very common to have a torch, but when I did my own surveys, when I was part of the surveyors, I noticed that most of the respondents have the torch because they just have one at home, but not because they are actually preparing for the emergency as part of the emergency kit. Well, actually, apart from what I have discussed so far, there are other factors that may influence people's implementation of preparatory actions. This slide shows some of the things that may affect the implementation of these preparatory actions. For example, if people believe that there is not a way to prevent a hazard or its consequences from happening, most likely they won't implement any of the actions, and that was the case in 40% of the respondents. If you don't really know what to do, well, of course you won't you won't have any preparedness. If you think the odds of being impacted are too remote, like it was the case in 36%, you are less likely to be prepared. If you believe that the responsibility is belongs to someone else, of course, you don't do anything for yourself. Or if you think you don't have the resources, if you think that you need the money to implement many of these actions, yeah, well, and you don't have the money, well, actually, you won't do it. And the other thing, or the other common thing, is that you wait until the very last moment. So 70% of the people will wait for a warning to actually implement something. So unless you change all these views, unless you work to change towards changing these views, the effectiveness of your interventions won't be as good. But actually, the questionnaire offers more than just the descriptive information on the survey. Actually, the questionnaire allows some statistical inference and further analysis. I just brought this example because I'm not going to go through all the analysis, which is part of my dissertation. But the slide, for example, shows how the level of education influences the likelihood of someone having discussed preparedness action in the household. And this relation was statistically significant. But as I said, this sort of analysis is part of my dissertation, and it will take a lot of time, which I'm not gonna expend at the moment in this presentation. So in sum, the experience in Chia confirms that there is an increasing trend in the number of emergencies and disasters around the world, and this is happening in Colombia, and that there is an increasing trend in the impact they have on individuals, communities, and societies. It also shows that there is a need to shift the focus towards building the capacity of vulnerable communities, moving away from the focus on response and recovery, and avoid considering that the top-down approach is the only option available. I think that what I realized with the experience is that communities, they do have resources, they do have knowledge, but sometimes they don't know the best way of using it, or sometimes they just need a push to actually improve their circumstances, and in this case, improve disaster risk management. So I think that's what I mean with this point, that instead of trying to bring responses and bring interventions thought with the thinking of the developed world, we can actually work with the communities in the developing world and try to improve and use the resources they have in the best way possible. Another observation is that the results of the study allow the consolidation of a participatory risk and vulnerability assessment. So in essence, what I did is to try to find out the knowledge, experience, attitudes, and behaviors in regards to disaster risk management. But the questionnaire itself is providing us information needed for a participatory risk assessment. We have information about hazards. We do have some information about the impact of those hazards in this community. We know how much access to information they have and what's the best way of giving that information. We also have an idea of how they have implemented activities in the community in regards to preparedness. So if you put all this information together, you actually start to have a participatory risk assessment based on the information provided directly by the community. There are some things that you might need to work out separately or in another type of activity. But then this is an objective approach that can be used by the community to actually improve their disaster risk management activities in the town and in the municipality. And finally, the main conclusion is that this type of research is valid as long as it is used to guide and improve local planning. It is part of the process, but not the end of it. So basically, part of what I'm trying to do now and next is that the municipality, the local government, actually uses this information. Because if I leave just this information in my dissertation and hopefully in a paper, well, that's good for me, but there's not that wouldn't be any benefit for the community. So what I'm trying to do now is to push the work that I did with the local firefighters and to work with them to try to get the local government to use this information to build better interventions in the community, to use that information to actually guide what are the things that are needed to be improved and what are the things that need to be done first as well. And all together build try to build a culture of safety, which is the main goal of disaster risk management, and it's the only way to achieve actually sustainable development. So that was all. Thank you all for your attention, and I really hope that my presentation is somehow useful for you. Um, Please contact me if you have any question, or if you would like some further information. Um, I hope I was clear and I deliver the messages the best way possible. And once again, I want to thank the support of the volunteer firefighting service, because without their support, this study wouldn't have been possible. So enjoy the rest of your course, and bye for now.